because what we find in the end of phase 2 is very interesting, that companies are becoming more sophisticated about this. And the first thing they're doing is naming a chief innovation officer. Right? Now, in some companies, that is the CTO, and now he has a new title, right? Chief Innovation Officer. It doesn't really mean much. But in other companies, we're trying to move beyond R&D to commercialize as well. And so, but we learn there are really no career paths for the scientists. If a project fails, the scientist is okay, we find. They're used to hypothesis testing. It's not as much viewed as failure. The guy did the experiment the correct way. He learned the correct thing. He's safe. He did his job. Now he goes on to the next project. His job is to discern if we should go forward or not. But the new business development person, their careers are in jeopardy. If a project fails, they may lose their job. And we find this all through these projects and companies that we've studied. And also on the opposite side, even if their projects are successful, they expect to become the general manager of that business, and it frequently does not happen, and they just rotate off that project and sort of go on. There's no real career path in innovation. So it makes it quite difficult for a company to expect that they can get better as a company in developing an expertise in innovation if you don't have people sticking around and doing it more than once, right? So that was what drove the next phase. So the surprise in this one, in phase 2, was that little square in the management system on talent development and skills. We found many problems there, so it drove this. So what roles and talent development and talent management practices contribute to institutionalizing breakthrough innovation in a company? And so we have 2 reasons. One, individual career satisfaction, but more importantly for the company, to develop a sophisticated expertise at breakthrough innovation. We find many times you'll take a person that's on the high potential leadership development path, they stick them on an innovation project for 6 months, then they rotate them off to the next thing, and that's how they get their people on their projects. It doesn't really help the company that much. So there's all these risks for people who are associated with breakthrough innovation. They get the pink slip. That, I don't know, and that's our jargon for if you get a pink slip, that means you got fired, right? It's unpredictability. Projects initially have very few people and small budget, and the way in our companies you get promoted is by having more people report to you and a bigger budget, right? So you can't get promoted if you just keep doing innovation projects under the current system. Okay. Also this bottom one, recognition discount. Innovation teams are given little credit once the new business begins to take off, right? The ones who started it, nobody remembers them. The obvious path here that people believe is their career path is that they start the little business like 3M, and they get promoted as they incubate it, and then they become the general manager of the business. But when you think about everything we've said about the differences in requirements for discovery and incubation and acceleration, you see it's almost impossible to expect one person to be able to manage through all of that. And in fact, in the venture capital world, venture capitalists frequently replace the head of the growing business because they know the skills from one aren't right for the next phase. So we were suggesting, we had a small article in Harvard Business Review in which we put out, there's no career paths, but if you were to think about it, could we start to say, if you're really good at incubation, keep doing it. And you start on a project, you're learning, and you're learning how to do incubation, then you have another project, maybe a bigger project, maybe over time, you're supervising a small portfolio of projects that are all being incubated at that time, right? So there's paths to do this. If you're very passionate about one project and in terms of scoping out the business concept and discovery, and you want to stick with it, as it is becoming incubated, you can stick with it, but it would be a lateral move, not a promotion, because you don't know how to do incubation. So that's something that we're suggesting. And companies are going, are you kidding? You know, this is too complicated. It's very hierarchical. It's not fluid. It's not aligned with people's passion. And we're finding differently from that, actually. Okay, so this has started the third phase, and it's in terms of how we collected this data, it was a surprise to us. We thought we were going to use the same approach. You interview the person responsible for the Breakthrough Innovation Mandate, and you ask him, and all the people in his group, and you ask him, how do you reward these people, evaluate them, what's the turnover in your staff, what are all the roles, etc. And then you call them up every 6 months or a year and find out change. There's not enough change for that to have been the right way to go. So what we did when we finally did visit them on site is they would then start to tell us about other people not in their immediate group that they relied on and worked with to make these breakthrough innovations happen. So we'd call those people up, and then those people would tell us more people, and we'd call those people up. So it's called a snowball sample, because as it rolls, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so that's just a crazy diagram to tell you how much we've been working. But we finally had our companies came to RPI in May, and we gave them the final results of this particular phase, which I'll just give you I can't give you all these things, but I can give you an idea what we're doing here. Yeah, so when you go back to DIA, what we realize is, in fact, we have seen people in different kinds of roles here that we could name. And the scarier part is that it's hierarchical. And again, companies don't buy that. Nobody wants to talk about hierarchy. Everything's a flat organization structure now, right? And so, but what we see is this, that you have roles at discovery and incubation and acceleration at the project level, people working at the project level, at the platform level, and then at the portfolio level, okay? And they each have different responsibilities, and they need to have had some different kinds of background and experiences to do these things. So here's some data that we showed at the Industrial Research Institute meetings, where these are certain companies that are color-coded, and some of the people's jobs that we interviewed. And what these guys are telling us is this: we are putting these people in monstrous roles. We're expecting people to do lots and lots of different things over time, where we're mixing discovery and incubation as one thing, and we're expecting people to take the business all the way through to acceleration. Then we thought about it ourselves and said, well, if we're going to impose this structure, did we actually interview anybody who fits in these cells? And so these numbers represent the people in our sample that we interviewed in these cells. We also identified that there are a lot of other types: facilitators and coaches, people in charge of strategic partnerships, some people who help make the link to strategic intent, all kinds. And this one here is a board. It's not one person. This is that governance board for making huge investment decisions. So we have to come up with some very interesting labels. I just tried this last night. These are not interesting. If you can think of some interesting labels, please tell me, because we have to be creative now at the terms that are very specific to what they do. But essentially, these are the opportunity developers at a strategic domain or a portfolio, platform. There's one person who's got many projects going. And then usually there's a director of discovery. It may be the chief technology officer, but it may be a person reporting to that person. Then it becomes an actual project, and you have a project leader, a new business program owner. This generally is the chief innovation officer. Sometimes it's above this, spanning all these things, but usually this person. And then if a business is accelerating, you need some people who run the functions, the general manager of the business, and then an innovation council. So this is what we're starting to think about, that for each of these roles, for each person we identified to study, we didn't have this thing in our head yet when we started this, we didn't have the framework in our head when we started this phase of the research. We just wanted to interview all the people involved in the innovation mandate. And for each of them, we got, what are your job title? What are your responsibilities? What do you do in a day, in a week, in a month? You know, what are your activities? How are you evaluated? How do you know that you're doing a good job? Some things about your background, like what kind of education you had and your career so far, the skills and expertise that person seems to demonstrate, and the critical experiences that they have had already. Okay? And so that's kind of where we are right now. We have developed all that out, and we have all of those results, and we have to make a clear enough case and a good sense of it to be able to write it in this next book without it being too tedious, right? But the point is any single company doesn't necessarily have to add 9 new jobs. What they start to find as they relax and listen and talk with us a little bit about it is that in fact they have people playing these roles already. We just don't make it clear, and therefore we can't develop people and develop that expertise very well. And so the hierarchy isn't necessarily bad. In fact, it's probably required. And there will be a chapter in this book called Squishing and Squeezing. Squish and squeeze, because if it's a medium-sized company, you may not need the 3 levels, right? And one person might do discovery and incubation if it's a smaller portfolio, for example. So this we'll put out there what the principle is, and then how we translate it into practice in any single one of our company may differ according to the context of the company. Okay, so there's another survey underway where we try to relate talent management practices to human capital outcomes, career satisfaction and expertise development, and then to breakthrough innovation success. And so we are starting to find some very interesting, strong empirical relationships through our surveys now, so that we can begin to make changes in management processes with greater confidence that they work. Okay, so this was just some reflections after 20 years of research, and which we gave yesterday. We talked about how do you manage a research program like this, which may or may not be so interesting to this audience here. Maybe what would be actually, I mean, more interesting is to say how strongly we feel now, in doing this research for so long, that companies will not get better at breakthrough innovation. It still is going to be by the passion model and individual champion model, unless we start to really think of it as a profession and as a discipline, because it is. It has its own set of skills. So what we're trying to talk with groups now about is, if we're going to do that, create a new discipline or recognize it, how does that happen? You know, how did that happen for total quality management or other kinds of things? Well, universities start putting educational programs in place. Companies in their organizational development and HR groups start defining these roles, right? And start hiring people into these roles and start creating training programs. And then we also need professional societies to begin to take this up. So in new product development, we have the Product Development Management Association, you know, where people can go and meet one another. With R&D, we have in the United States the Industrial Research Institute. We need something around new business creation, and that's really about innovation. And so we're trying to search around for where that might be. So I think with that, a lot of research output. I think I can just open it up. If you're not asleep or completely numb in your chairs, if you want to have any questions or discussion, it would be great.